Okay, so get ready, because we're going to do a deep dive into your philosophy notes today. Looks like you've been thinking hard about why philosophy still matters, even with how fast everything's moving these days, all the tech and everything.
Yeah, it's a good question to think about. We live in a world where everyone wants things fast, what's useful right now. It makes it easy to forget about the deeper questions philosophy asks.
I gotta admit, like, before going through these notes, I hadn't really thought about what a world without philosophy would even look like. Kind of scary when you actually imagine it. Like, what if humanity just lost its moral compass?
It's a really important point you're bringing up. Your notes use this image of a barren landscape to describe a world without philosophy, and that's powerful, right? Because without that ethical framework, without constantly questioning our values and the systems we build, we're kind of just stumbling around in the dark.
Yeah, and about those ethical questions, it seems like the more advanced we get, especially with technology, the more ethical dilemmas pop up, like AI, bioethics, almost every day there's something new.
Exactly. Your notes are spot on with that. Take artificial intelligence, for example. We're creating machines that are becoming more and more capable of making decisions, complex decisions even. So that forces us to confront some really profound questions about what consciousness even is.
Mhm.
Free will, even how we define life itself. These aren't just thought experiments anymore. They have real consequences.
Yeah, it's almost like philosophy gives us that framework, that mental toolkit to approach these things. Speaking of frameworks, you know I love a good analogy. And in your notes, you compare philosophy to the lifeblood of civilization, which is a pretty bold statement. What makes it so vital if it's not an actual organ like a heart or lungs?
I know, right? When you put it like that, side by side with things like medicine or technology, it's easy to miss how important philosophy is. But just imagine, a society with zero shared understanding of what justice is. No guiding principles for making moral choices, no framework to understand the human condition. It'd be like trying to build a skyscraper without any blueprints. You might get a few bricks stacked, but the whole thing would fall apart eventually.
So it's like it gives us the foundation, those basic principles, like a blueprint for how we deal with the world, each other, even ourselves, right?
Exactly. If you had to boil it down, philosophy is all about asking questions, examining, trying to reach a deeper understanding. It's about giving ourselves the tools to not just get by in the world, but to really understand where we fit into it.
That makes sense, but I can already hear people pushing back. That's all theoretical, but how does any of this help me actually live a better life today? It feels like there's this gap sometimes between these big philosophical ideas and our everyday experiences.
It's a really good point, and it highlights a challenge that philosophy has always dealt with. How do we bridge that gap between the abstract and the concrete, between thought and lived experience? One of the absolute most important skills that comes from philosophy is critical thinking, something you highlighted in your notes.
Yeah, critical thinking seems more important than ever these days.
Yeah.
There's so much information out there, so many different sides to every story. It's like, how do you even know what to believe anymore?
You're preaching to the choir. And it's interesting, your notes actually make this connection between critical thinking today and, get this, the ancient Greek marketplace, the agora.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So back then, shoppers had to figure out which goods were actually good quality and which ones were just cheap knockoffs. And it's the same now, but instead of figs and sandals, it's information. We're bombarded with it, and philosophy gives us those critical thinking skills to tell the difference, to sort through it all.
So it's not just about like spotting fake news or whatever, it's about questioning everything, our own biases too.
You got it. Critical thinking is about being open to being wrong, to having your mind changed. It's about being willing to consider different points of view, even if they make you uncomfortable.
Which, let's be real, can be tough. But that makes me think philosophy isn't really about easy answers, is it? It's about asking the right questions, even if it just leads to more questions. Speaking of which, you've got some notes here about specific areas of philosophy, like epistemology, metaphysics, big words. Always a little intimidating, honestly.
I hear you. The jargon can be a bit much sometimes. But at the heart of it, they're really just grappling with questions that we all think about on some level. Like take epistemology, right?
Okay.
It sounds very academic, but what it boils down to is, how do we know what we know?
Yeah.
It's about the very nature of knowledge itself.
So instead of just accepting what we're told, it's about like digging deeper, figuring out where the information came from, if it makes sense, all that.
Exactly. And it goes
Yeah.
even deeper into the different schools of thought. Like there's empiricism, which says that knowledge comes from our senses, what we experience. But then there's rationalism, which is all about using reason and logic to arrive at knowledge.
So is it our senses that tell us what's true, or is it our minds figuring things out based on what our senses tell us? Man, that's a brain twister for sure. And what about metaphysics? That one always seems even more abstract.
Yeah, metaphysics is where things get really big picture. It deals with the nature of reality itself, free will, whether there's some kind of higher power out there. A classic example is the ship of Theseus paradox. Have you heard of that one?
Rings a bell, but remind me.
Okay, so imagine a ship. Over time, every single part of it gets replaced, one by one, until there's none of the original ship left. Is it still the same ship?
Whoa, that is a mind bender. I mean, if every piece is different, is it still the same thing? Makes you wonder not just about objects, but about people too. Like, are we still the same person we were 10 years ago?
That's the beauty of metaphysics.
Yeah.
It makes us think beyond the surface, question everything we thought we knew about existence, identity, what it means to be.
Definitely makes you think. So, okay, we've got these critical thinking skills from philosophy, and we're starting to see how these different branches of it work, but I don't know, philosophy still gets this rap for being too abstract, too disconnected from what people deal with every day. What would you say to that?
Yeah, it's easy to see it that way, right? Like
Mm.
philosophy is just this thing for academics, not for normal people, all these complicated theories and jargon. But I feel like there's got to be more to it.
You're right, there's definitely more to it than that. I mean, sure, some of the discussions can get pretty specific and detailed, but the core questions, the stuff they're really wrestling with, it's all about the human experience. Think about the trolley problem.
Oh, yeah, right.
We were talking about it earlier. That's a perfect example of how these thought experiments, even if they sound kind of crazy at first, they make us think about real ethical problems. Yeah, it's not really about a runaway trolley, is it? It's about those impossible choices we have to make sometimes in life and what values guide those choices, right?
Exactly. The trolley problem, it forces you to look at your own moral compass,
Hmm.
figure out what principles you're not willing to compromise on. And sometimes there just isn't a clear-cut right answer, which can be really unsettling.
Right. It's about learning to be okay with that gray area, that sometimes the most important thing is just to ask the hard questions, even if there's not an easy solution. Which reminds me, you mentioned in your notes that you don't have to be some kind of scholar to do philosophy. We all do it every day just by living our lives. How so?
It's true. Every time you make a decision based on your gut, your values, that's philosophy in action. Or when you're grappling with a tough choice ethically or just trying to make sense of something confusing, that's what philosophy is all about.
Yeah.
It's not about memorizing a bunch of theories. It's about being curious, thinking critically, questioning the world around you.
So it's less about having all the answers figured out and more about like being open to exploring, learning, changing your mind even.
100%. It's about asking why
Hmm.
more often, challenging what you think you know, being open to different ways of seeing things. And the best part is, there are so many ways to get into philosophy. You
Mhm.
don't have to read those super dense old books unless you want to. There are awesome podcasts out there, books written for regular people, online courses even. It's become a lot more accessible.
That's good to know. So really, philosophy is for everyone then. It's about that very human need to understand,
Yeah,
ourselves, the world, all of it.
totally. And maybe, especially now, when everything feels so complicated and uncertain, taking some time to think about the big questions, to work on our critical thinking skills, to learn from people who've been wrestling with these ideas for centuries, maybe that's more important than ever, don't you think?
I think you might be onto something. It's not about knowing everything. It's about being brave enough to ask the questions, even the ones that make us uncomfortable, challenge our own perspective. And who knows, maybe that's how we start to figure out what it really means to be human in this crazy, incredible world.